Alright, what's going on, guys? Today we're going to be looking at another World Championship winning deck of the past. This time we'll be looking at White, Blue, Green Wake, or as we would call it today, Bant Wake. This deck won the 2003 World Championship, which took place in Berlin, Germany, and the deck was piloted by Daniel Zink. This is a special one for me because this deck is composed of the sets that I started playing with when I first got into the game back in 2002. Standard at the time was composed of the Odyssey block, the Onslaught block, and 8th edition, which was the first set with the modern border, by the way. I mean, I wasn't a competitive player, I didn't play against this deck, I didn't play with this deck, but you know, it's kind of cool for me because this was magic for me. Like, this is what I came into. I came into Odyssey Onslaught. So, you know, this is the environment that I came into. Thankfully, nobody played this deck, though, because this deck is, it's a control deck, right? It's a blue-white control deck, and it probably wasn't very fun to play against. Anyway, so onto the deck. Wake, at its core, it was a blue-white control deck with a very important green splash, and it had a very spicy way of winning after pushing the game into the late game. And another cool thing is that it could actually kill you from its sideboard. In game 1, it could kill you from its sideboard, not by sideboarding things in, but just by killing you from its sideboard. I know, crazy, right? We'll get to that. But first, let's look at how it controlled the game, and then we'll get into the win conditions. So it starts off with 4 copies of Mana Leak and 1 copy of Circular Logic. I suspect we all know what Mana Leak does, right? It's a control staple, 2 mana, counter target spell unless its controller pays 3, but you might be less familiar with Circular Logic. It basically does the same thing as Mana Leak, but the opponent has to pay 1 for each card in your graveyard, which is kind of convenient actually because it scales up as the game progresses, so that's kind of fantastic. Moving on, the deck played a playset of Wrath of God and 2 Vengeful Dreams. Once again, we have a classic control spell in the form of a Wrath of God, the OG board sweeper, you know, 4 mana, destroy all creatures. And then Vengeful Dreams, on the other hand, allows you to exile attacking creatures for each card you discard. Now this is a bit less exciting because at the end of the day you're trading card for card. You're not going up in card advantage, but you know, at the end of the day, you know, you're pushing the game late, you're wiping out your opponent's board, you're trading card for card, and you're just pushing the game another turn deeper into the game, which is what you want to do with this deck. So next up, we have some more stalling tactics in the form of Moment's Peace and Renewed Faith. Moment's Peace allows you to fog out your opponents for 2 turns because it has flashback. So if you manage to get a couple of these in a game, you have a pretty good chance to make it to turns, you know, 6 or 7, relatively unscathed, because, you know, each one pushes you 2 turns deeper. So if you can play it on turns 2 and 3, you made it to turn 4, and then if you can go through 4 and 5, casting another set of them, or another Moment's Peace and flashback, yeah, you can get pretty deep into the game just by fogging out your opponents with Moment's Peace. Renewed Faith, on the other hand, is a life gain spell, but the versatility was very useful at the time, because you could cycle it, right? So that was the main idea, that you just wanted to cycle it, get a card, gain 2 life. Nothing too exciting, but it's just, you know, draw a card deeper into your deck, and gain a couple life while you're at it. But you could cast it, gain 6 life if necessary to, you know, save your skin. If you're facing down an aggro deck or something, and maybe you just can't find Moment's Peace, totally doable, that's fine. The deck also ran Deep Analysis, a very popular card for the time. 4 mana to draw 2 cards isn't too exciting, but it does have flashback, so basically you get 4 cards out of it, which is fantastic. That allows you to draw very deep into your deck, and pretty much every control deck, you know, wants to draw cards, and this was a great way to do it at the time. So that's how the deck stalled out the game. Countering spells, wiping the board, fogging the opponent, gaining some life, just pushing the game later and later and later. So, how did the deck win? You might be asking that. Well, it's interesting. Let's just say that. It's interesting. The deck looked to win the game by casting Decree of Justice. Yes, Decree of Justice. It costs double X and 4 to cast. That's a hefty mana cost, and then you get a number of 4/4 flying angels equal to X. That's right, first you had to pay 4 mana just to cast it, and then you need to double X. So that's a very expensive card. You could also cycle it and get some 1/1s and draw a card, but at the end of the day, it requires a lot of mana. I mean, just think, in order to get lethal damage with this, like if you wanted to get 20 damage on the battlefield with it, you need to cast it for 14. 14 to get 5 4/4s so you could win the game the next turn. Obviously, you don't need to cast it for that much, but you know, it's a lot of mana. It needs a lot of mana. So it seems kind of unlikely, right? Like, how are you going to get that much mana? Are you really going to push the game that late every single game? Well, yeah, kind of, but it actually had a more interesting way to accumulate mana. And this is where the deck gets its name. It's called White, Blue, Green Wake, remember? So, do you want to know where the Wake comes from? Well, it comes from Mirari's Wake. So, Mirari's Wake is a 5 mana enchantment that gives creatures you control +1/+1. Now, that's kind of irrelevant, not important. What is important is the paragraph below that. Whenever you tap a land for mana, you get to double your mana. That's right, double your mana. Suddenly, tapping for 14 isn't so hard, is it? Because you only need 7 lands for that now. Yeah, so not hard to achieve it all with a control deck. I mean, heck, who says you need lethal damage? The turn you cast Mirari's Wake, even if you don't draw another land, you can tap for 10 and put out 3 4/4 flyers or 7 1/1s, and you know, that should pretty much win you the game if you can continue the control of the game afterwards. So now you get it, right? You control the board for several turns, you get a Mirari's Wake in play, and then you cast a massive Decree of Justice and flood the board with angels or soldiers. Pretty spicy. And don't forget, by the way, Mirari's Wake is not legendary. You can have multiple copies of it on the battlefield and triple or quadruple your mana. So, yep, that's a lot of mana, that's a lot of angels, it's a lot of just kind of ridiculousness. But wait, it gets even more ridiculous, because the deck also ran a single copy of Mirari. Now, Mirari allows you to copy an instant or sorcery spell for 3 mana, and most of the time it's worth spending 3 less mana to cast Decree of Justice, so you can save 3 mana to double cast it. So, yep, hooray for math. So there you go, guys. Blue, white, green, Wake. So there are a couple more cards we need to look at though, because there is some more spiciness at hand. First off, the deck played 3 copies of Compulsion, and Compulsion is insane. It allows you to pay 2 mana and discard a card to draw a card. That might not seem all that great at first glance, but it means that at the end of your opponent's turn, you can dump all of your unused mana into Compulsion and just dig through your deck. Like, if you've got 4 cards in hand and none of them are really what you're looking for at the moment, why not discard them and draw 4 more cards, right? Like, you can just dig deep into your deck. You aren't gaining card advantage, but you're looting the crap out of your deck. Kind of a crazy card, actually. Now, what's really crazy about this deck, as I mentioned earlier, is that this deck could actually kill from its sideboard, because it played 3 copies of Cunning Wish. Now, there were multiple Wish cards around this time in Magic, and they all allowed you to pull any card out of your collection and put it into your hand, which is kind of crazy, but in official tournaments, you could only pull things out of your sideboard, but that's still kind of crazy. I mean, your sideboard is filled with cards that hate on other decks, right? You're running enchantment hate and artifact hate and creature hate. You're running things that hate against your opponent's decks. And with Cunning Wish, you have access to those in game 1 at any given time, so long as you have a Cunning Wish. So that's kind of crazy. It turns your sideboard into a toolbox that you could use against your opponent, or you could just kill your opponent. Because one of the cards in the sideboard was a single copy of Hunting Pack. Now, this seems pretty terrible, right? A 7 mana spell that puts a 4/4 beast into play with Storm, right? So Storm's kind of nice, but you know, it seems so. 7 mana is a lot. But as we've discussed, this deck could put out massive amounts of mana. So just imagine this. Imagine you're playing against this deck. You tap all of your lands to cast a big spell that's going to swing the game in your favor. Your opponent casts Mana Leak. Well, you sigh unhappily and you pass the turn. But at the end of your turn, your opponent casts Cunning Wish, grabbing a Hunting Pack. And then they cast Hunting Pack. And guess what? There were 4 spells cast. So it puts 4 4/4 beasts into play. That's right, at the end of your turn, it puts 16 damage onto the battlefield. You're about to take 16 damage to the face out of nowhere. And hey, maybe they even had enough mana to duplicate the spell with Mirari. Well, that's gonna be problematic, isn't it? Yep, that could happen. The deck could kill you from its sideboard. So a quick look at the mana base. It ran Flooded Strand, Elfhame Palace, and Skycloud Expanse just to reach into 3 colors. Just trying to, have a diverse mana base. It also played a couple of Corrosion Verge, a pseudo fetch land thing, and then the deck just played 7 islands, 4 plains, and 4 forests. So yeah, pretty simple mana base. I mean, we're just talking about some duels and some basics. Not looking to do anything super crazy with your mana. And a super quick look at the sideboard. And remember that this deck ran Cunning Wish, so there are a lot of 1-ofs, so it could tutor up specific things at any given time. But the sideboard ran 3 Anurid Brushhoppers and 2 Exalted Angels, which was one of the most powerful creatures in the format at the time, just because it was a potential 4/5 flyer with lifelink on turn 4. Pretty crazy for the time period. It also ran Ray of Distortion and Ray of Revelation for artifacts and enchantments, as well as Corrosion Reclamation for graveyards. It also ran an extra copy of Circular Logic in case that was necessary. It had Winged Shards and another Vengeful Dreams as board sweepers, and Winged Shards has that, again, it has Storm, so it has that spicy synergy with Cunning Wish. Play Cunning Wish, get the Winged Shards, you've already got a Storm count of 2 at the very least. And then speaking of Storm, it did have, again, that 1 copy of Hunting Pack, which we mentioned earlier, as well as an extra copy of Renewed Faith, in case you find yourself in a dire situation. And that is the entire deck. White, Blue, Green Wake, Bant Wake, the 2003 World Championship winning deck, as piloted by Daniel Zink. Control the opponent, find a Mirari's Wake, and then do big stuff with loads of mana. That is the deck that won the World Championship with the sets that I learned to play Magic with. Odyssey, Onslaught, and this is the World Championship deck that came from those sets. A bit of nostalgia for me, but that's the deck. That is Wake. And now you are familiar with another deck from Magic the Gathering's history. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this interesting, and I will see you in the next one.